Thank you all for being here today. I'm so thrilled to be here with you. I know you come from many different places, and I'm really excited because I know your work is very, very important. I can't thank you enough for your commitment and your dedication to continuing improving your skills. Deaf children's education depends on people like you, so thank you, each and every one of you, so much for coming here. And I know you're very eager to keep on working on your skills. And I know signing is not easy, and interpreting is worse. It's very challenging, and it's a big responsibility. So I'm excited to be here with you. See a picture of me there? I feel like I posted it on a dating app because it's from several years ago. I feel almost like I've catfished you. I was less heavy there and better looking, so I've tricked you guys into coming. Now I'm an old man. So today, different things will be happening, and it's hard to condense it into 4 hours. There's not much hands-on practice going on today. Most of it is just storytelling in the class. And you'll have to practice on your own and apply it yourself. We don't have the time to do that here. It's not the time or the place. Hopefully, I'll give you different ideas and different ways of bringing these ideas home with you so you can use them yourself. I won't be able to give you any feedback or practice time. So you'll have the opportunity to do it at home. But these will be the course objectives. I am very lucky. I grew up, I had a really good life. My family's deaf. The grandparents are deaf. They told me stories. My grandparents were teachers. So my life has been very easy. Language development wasn't a problem for me. I've had language since day one. But I know many of your students, it's not been that way for them. Again, meaning that it increases your responsibility because you have to teach them things that they're not getting. So I want to tell you some stories that my grandparents told me. My grandparents used to tell me a lot of stories in ASL. At bedtime, my grandmother would tell me lots of stories. It's a really great memory for me. My grandfather didn't tell me as many stories. He was a quiet man. But my grandmother, oh, she was a good storyteller. So I want to tell you three of her stories, and maybe they'll impact you and you could pick some ideas from them for storytelling purposes. The first one is the setting is in a funeral home. My grandmother loved to tell stories about funerals and death. I really don't know why. Maybe because she had a deaf friend that worked at a funeral home and would always tell her stories about what happened at his workplace. So I'll tell you this one story about a funeral home. There was a woman whose husband died, and they were a poor family. So she went to the funeral home and she said, I'm really embarrassed. I don't have any money. My husband's died and he doesn't have a suit. I wanna I wanna bury him looking nice, but I have no suit for him and no money with which to buy one. So I'm embarrassed. What do I do? And the funeral director said, oh, don't worry about it. We happen to have another family who had somebody die that's about the same age and same height, and they're quite wealthy, family of means. So maybe we can ask them to lend you a suit. And she said, thank you so much. Please do that for me. So the funeral director asked the other family, would you be willing to lend a suit to a poor woman for her deceased husband? And they said, yes, that's fine. I just can't decide if I want to bury my husband in the blue or the brown, the other family, the wealthy wife, widow. So if I pick brown, I'll give her the blue. If I pick blue, I'll give her the brown. So the wealthy wife said, I think I like blue. My favorite color is blue. I think it will look good on my husband. So I'll give the other family, the other widow, the brown one. So the poor widow accepted that and was very happy. But come afternoon, the wealthy widow said, you know what? My husband preferred brown. I think it would be better to respect him to bury him in the brown because it's not about me, it's about him. So I'd prefer the brown one. Would you mind switching back with me? And so the other family said, no problem. But then again, the wealthy widow was like, I want my husband to look good. I don't think the brown one will look good on him. So she changed her mind again. I want the blue one. I want him buried in the blue suit. Would you please mind asking the other widow for my blue suit back? And then her conscience was bothering her because she said to the funeral director, I know I'm so sorry that having to take the clothes off of the deceased and switch them back and forth for my preferences is a lot of work for you. I'm really sorry about that. And the funeral director said, no problem. I just cut their heads off and switch them so that they'll be in the right suit. Switch the heads onto the different bodies. When I told my kids that story, they were very wide eyed and shocked. Was it a true story? I really have no idea, but you never know. So, another story. My grandmother loved to tell me stories about kings long ago and what would go on. So, a lot of the stories had to do with when the king was not happy, off with your head. Maybe he switched the heads, I don't know. So, you had to make the king happy. So, one story had to do with the king who wanted people to tell him stories until he fell asleep. And if when the person was done with the story, he was still awake, it was off with their head. So the king had a hard time sleeping. He had insomnia. So he a lot of heads rolled. So there was one man, or maybe it was a woman, I don't really know. It was this person's turn. And they thought, what am I going to do? Okay, I know what I'll do. I know the story I'll tell. So one day, the story is one day there was a picnic, and many people went to eat at this picnic. And there were some ants. It was their responsibility to find food to let the other ants know where it was so they can all come gather it. So the ants went and found a delicious cake. I thought, oh, great. I'll go tell my friends about that. So they went off and told their friends about it. So the other ants came. They took some cake. All right, awesome, good cake. And so they went and told some other ants about it. They called some other ants and they went back to get some more cake and they went back and forth just like that. And that story continued on and on and on. The ants went back and forth. And so that story continued on until the king fell asleep. Finally fell asleep. Now, the third story. A long, long time ago, many deaf people moved to Akron, Ohio during the war, World War I and World War II. They also moved to Detroit and they moved to work in the factories to make war equipment. So many of the factory workers had gone off to war, so they needed people to replace them. So they were hiring many deaf and many women to replace the workers that had been there. During war, deaf people's lives tend to be better because it's easier for them to get work. But whenever the war ends, it goes back to the same difficult life. So a man and a woman moved to Akron to work at a factory to make war equipment, to make weapons. The job interview, the test was they had an IQ test and a speed test and a skill test. So there's one story. The deaf were very fast workers. So for the test, they had many bolts that they had to screw on, screws, and they were timed at how fast they could screw on the bolts. The hearing people tended to do it the way I'm showing you right here. They would screw it on in this methodical way. But the deaf, they were much faster at it. They did it this way. They would fling the bolt and it would quickly screw on. And the hearing people would turn instead of flinging their hands. And so the deaf tended to think differently and they were faster and they were more visually oriented. And so their employers thought, wow. And so I'll let you know that what was the point of these stories? The first one is just entertainment and enjoyment. And the second was to put me to sleep because my grandmother wanted to go to bed herself. The third reason was for me to learn life lessons. That's why my grandmother would tell me these stories so that I could apply the lessons to my life in the real world, in a hearing world. And most hearing people have no idea about deaf world. Most of the time, deaf people have to prove ourselves. We have to be better workers and harder workers. So these helped me to learn life lessons so that I could be successful and have a good education and a good life. I was really lucky. So there are two ways to tell ASL stories. One is to elaborate in ASL, and the other is to follow the text of a book. And both are important, and we'll be discussing both. So signing stories for the purpose of signing, such as the one about the heads being switched and the king cutting off people's heads, is one way of doing it. Another way is to follow a book and follow the text exactly so a child can learn how to read. The first way in expanding in ASL, the point is to expand in the story and tell the story. The second way is to follow the book. Just so you know, I interpreted this at speed 1.25. So if you want to see it at speed, slow it down 25 by 0.25.